the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
This is Anton Chigurh. With an untraceable name, no family, and no home, Chigurh is an omnipresent psychopathic killer. He's an unstoppable force who doesn't abide by the same moral code as the rest of the world. Everything he does is very intentional, so he doesn't kill unless necessary. Unfortunately for those who have the grave misfortune of meeting him, he deems it necessary quite often.
How do we bring this symbolic idea of violence into a man's behavior? And the first thing they brought is this insane haircut, and since it was my hair, I wasn't very happy because I have to live with that hair for 3 months, but I thought it helped me tremendously to understand this kind of methodical, almost mathematical way of approaching his goals and his duty.
While his true motives are never explained, his psychopathy is guided by strict obedience to a distorted moral ideology. This overarching ideology allows him to feel justified and even satisfied in killing those who fall short of his standards. Speaking of falling short, in this scene we find two opposing individuals colliding in a game of chance through a coin toss. Chigurh on one side and a store clerk on the other. This oblivious man doesn't realize it, but the fate of his life has slipped completely out of his hands. But it's not in Chigurh's hands anymore either. It was handed over to chance. But let's rewind. No Country for Old Men was released in 2007 as an adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's book of the same name. In this film, the Coen brothers crafted one of the most formidable and sinister antagonists in cinema. His name is Anton Chigurh. The plot follows the path of an honest war veteran, Llewellyn Moss, after he stumbles upon a drug deal gone wrong in the Texan Plains. His life is set on a new trajectory when he returns home with a case of cash to the tune of $2.4 million. Unfortunately for Moss, people don't simply forget about $2 million. Moss's intentions are pure as he wants to make a better life for himself and his dearly loved wife, Carla Jean. Chigurh picks up Moss's trail, catapulting the two men into a life-or-death game of cat and mouse. But will Llewellyn Moss's resourcefulness and quick wit be enough to keep Chigurh at bay, or will his negotiation with death prove unsuccessful? Over the course of Chigurh's violent pursuance, Moss is far from the only ill-fated individual to encounter the psychopathic killer. In the first scene of the film, Chigurh gets arrested and taken to the police station. While the officer is distracted by the phone, Chigurh slowly approaches and strangles him to death with his handcuffs. It's a brutal scene, and Anton's reaction when the cop finally goes limp is chilling. It's almost as if a wave of satisfaction has washed over him. Playing over the scene is the sound of a train. This audibly represents the unrelenting power and unstoppable momentum of Chigurh as a killer. The scene is necessary in its duration and savagery to set the framework of Chigurh's abilities both physically and mentally. It establishes his comfort with taking another's life and his confidence in succeeding. He's clearly well practiced, especially to warrant murdering an officer in broad daylight in the station where anyone could see. Shortly after, Chigurh uses his weapon of choice, a captive bolt gun, to kill a civilian and commandeer his vehicle. The captive bolt gun is commonly used to stun cattle before they're slaughtered. This reveals Chigurh's disregard for human life as he mercilessly kills people like animals. With those two scenes, the movie has established just how dangerous Chigurh is, which leads us to a certain type of sinister interaction, the negotiation.
I was always thinking that there was a superior voice and order that was making a decision through me.
Chigurh's motives are not explicitly defined, and he remains mysterious for that reason. But we do know that this greater voice he abides by is what instructs his actions, and he does not deviate from it. To the outside world, he is completely insane, but in his own mind, Chigurh is justified. In a way, he feels like he's purging the world of its wrongs.
There are things that must be done in terms of create a better world. He will follow his own ethics, no matter what, and he will do it against his own will. I guess that's the crazy part. Like if something beyond his control or over him is telling him how to act.
In these circumstances, Chigurh places the victim's fate in the hands of chance. Letting a coin decide whether someone lives or dies is a way that he restrains the onslaught of death. The responsibility of deciding is taken out of Chigurh's hands, and he simply enacts fate's bidding. Chigurh invites the victim into the decision by requiring them to call the coin. This is where the negotiation begins. Instead of unrestrained murder, questions are exchanged, motives are uncovered, and true feelings are revealed. This invitation for the other party to participate can vary in its sincerity, as you'll see in a future example. So now that we have a better understanding of who Chigurh is and how he operates, let's go back to the Texaco.
What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Call it.
Yes.
For what?
Just call it.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it. You know what date is on this coin?
No.
1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails. And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
All right. Heads, then.
Well done.
This coin toss scene with the store owner is the most famous example of Chigurh extending an offer on the life of a man. What would have been a harmless interaction rapidly becomes grim as the clerk makes one fatal mistake. Possibly the biggest mistake the man has ever made in his life was asking Chigurh how the weather was.
Any rain up your way?
What way would that be?
To Chigurh, this inquiry represents a violation of his anonymity and immediately shifts the tone of the conversation. The clerk continues to over-explain in his responses and digs an increasingly deeper hole for himself. The moment that handed his life over to Chigurh was his admittance to marrying into his current way of life.
You married into it.
We lived in Temple, Texas for many years. Raised a family there in Temple. We come out here about 4 years ago.
You married into it.
That's the way you want to put it.
I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is.
To Chigurh, the life this man chose for himself is a violation of the way people should live, and he is therefore justified in eliminating him.
There are things that must be done in terms of create a better world, what he thinks is a better world. And in this case, it's a world where people don't marry into businesses. They own or they earn their own businesses. So when he says that it was his father's shop, he says, so you marry into it. That is a change. It's like, wow, that's not good.
To add to the tension of this scene, Chigurh picks up a wrapper and places it on the counter. The camera holds on the wrapper as it slowly crinkles and expands. This release of tension is juxtaposed with the verbal exchange, which remains very tense, thus increasing the viewer's anxiety and discomfort. While the wrapper is visually conveying a release, the reality is much the opposite. As the conversation progresses, a faint music track begins playing. The music increasingly builds the tension as the man comes closer and closer to calling the coin. Naturally, the man asks Chigurh what he stands to win. Chigurh responds,
You stand to win everything, call it.
In a way, when facing Chigurh, you're already assumed dead because only from the position of complete non-existence can you stand to gain everything. In this way, Chigurh is characterized as the messenger of death itself. This perspective of standing to gain everything is something that can be applied to our own lives. Every situation, whether it be conflict or opportunity, can change the trajectory of our lives. How we react decides whether we gain or lose, but at that moment, we stand to win everything. Tension is at its peak when the two men slowly look down and Chigurh takes his hand off the coin. Heads. Suddenly, the music stops and the pacing shifts. Lines are delivered with less air between them, and Chigurh's demeanor becomes slightly more amiable. The store owner didn't anticipate anything unusual would occur that day, yet he came out on the other side, gaining his whole life. Chigurh instructs the clerk to keep the coins separate from the other quarters.
Don't put it in your pocket.
Sir?
Don't put it in your pocket. It's your lucky quarter.
Where you want me to put it?
Anywhere not in your pocket. Or it'll get mixed in with the others and become just a coin. Which it is.
Chigurh wants him to remember the coin as a trophy, signifying the moment when chance overruled death.
Yes.
Nobody. Accounting. Are you going to shoot me?
That depends. Do you see me?
The next instance of negotiation comes with the accountant. Chigurh vigorously enters the room and shoots the man at the desk with a shotgun. With his back turned, he begins questioning the accountant. The accountant glances at the door and confirms that there's no possibility of escape. He's trapped, and he knows it. All the while, Chigurh has been staring at the man bleeding out on the ground, a sight that any sane person would find incredibly disturbing. The tension builds through the silence after each line. The scene carries its own weight and doesn't need music to instill a feeling of terror. The accountant asks if Chigurh is going to shoot him. Finally, he turns around, and the eye contact alone causes the accountant to stagger. Chigurh responds with another question.
That depends. Do you see me?
Now, obviously, this scene is much different from the previous coin toss scene, but I find it just as chilling. The scene cuts before anyone says a word. By this point, the viewer is acutely aware of who Chigurh is, and his infamy leads them to the only possible inference of the accountant's fate. The scene highlights how important it is for Chigurh to remain unknown and undefined. The accountant feasibly had not seen his face yet because Chigurh's back was turned to him, but all odds of survival are thrown out the window when Chigurh turns around. With this turn, he's essentially licking the envelope. The accountant comes face to face with death, and unlike the store clerk, he knows his fate. The faint smile Chigurh puts on when he poses the question, and the slight inflection of his voice conveys a chilling sarcasm, sure to terrify anyone on the receiving end. Now, this scene is no coin toss, and chance plays no part in its proceeding. However, I'm including it to highlight Chigurh's insane rationality and terrifying screen presence. Once again, he acts as the messenger of death, this time extending a rhetorical question instead of a coin toss. Both men know that the accountant can never be set free after what he's just witnessed. Towards the end of the film, Chigurh returns to the coin toss, this time with Carla Jean, Llewellyn's wife.
You got no cause to hurt me.
No. But I gave my word.
You gave your word?
Your husband had the opportunity to save you. Instead, he used you to try to save himself.
You don't have to do this.
People always say the same thing.
What do they say?
They say, you don't have to do this.
You don't.
Okay. This is the best I can do.
Call it.
I know you was crazy when I saw you sitting there.
Call it.
No. I ain't gonna call it.
Call it.
The coin don't have no say. It's just you.
I got here the same way the coin did.
Carla Jean takes a seat, the light on her face contrasted with Chigurh sitting in the darkness. Chigurh is there to uphold his end of the deal with her husband and kill her. In response to her opposition, Chigurh invites Carla Jean into the deciding process of her fate, thus opening negotiation. Sparing her life would require him to defy his moral code by going back on his word, so instead he decides to flip a coin and let chance decide her fate. As he makes this decision, Chigurh lets out a sigh,
Okay.
as if he just begrudgingly lowered the price of an item he's selling. This really is the best he can offer. It should be noted that he always requires the victim to call the coin. This way he completely removes himself from the equation. He relegates his position to the enactor of chance's bidding. Carla Jean says that he doesn't have to do this. Chigurh responds that people always say the same thing. He's almost annoyed or confused as to why people respond the way they do. This point in the conversation emphasizes two things. First, it further distances Chigurh from humanity as he positions himself outside the collective human nature that begs for mercy when facing death. Second, it emphasizes his devotion to his moral obligations. In his mind, it's senseless and lacking dignity for someone to plead for mercy after someone's word has been given. From his perspective, Llewellyn failed to uphold his end of the deal, so it naturally follows that Carla Jean will be killed. It's non-negotiable. Despite this, as the mediator of death itself, he decides to flip a coin. Carla Jean says that the coin has no say in it. In a way, she's right. It's completely up to Chigurh whether she lives or dies. We're never told if Carla Jean called it, or what happened in the aftermath. For the viewer, two important clues tell us that Carla Jean was killed. The first and most obvious tip-off is when Anton checks the bottoms of his boots when leaving her house. This calls back to Chigurh's interaction with Carson.
And you know what's going to happen now, Carson? You should admit your situation. There will be more dignity in it.
You go to hell.
Mm-hmm. Do you know where I'm going?
Yeah, I know where you're going.
All right.
The second nod is the sound that plays at the end of the scene in a J-cut. The sound of the two bikes plays over his face, which is reminiscent of the train when he killed the cop. It's a subtle reminder that Chigurh can never be restrained or stopped. There's a theme that's repeated in this scene that was also found in the gas station confrontation. It's the idea of the coin's journey. Chigurh says that he got to this position the same way the coin did. By Chigurh admitting that his and the coin's journey are one and the same, the coin can be viewed as a continuation of himself. It plays the same role in deciding when death should be dealt and when it should be restrained. The coin decides through chance, and Chigurh decides through his dark moral code. When the store owner called heads, he was tails, and whatever Carla Jean called, Chigurh was waiting on the other side. The last scene, which I wasn't initially planning on discussing, takes place immediately after the murder of Carla Jean.
Are you alright? You got a bone sticking out your arm.
What did you take for the shirt?
Well, hell, mister. I'll give you my shirt.
Tie this for me. Just tie it. Just tie it.
Hell, mister. Okay, I don't mind helping someone out. It's a lot of money.
Take it. Take it, and you didn't see me. I was already gone.
Yes, sir.
As Chigurh sits on the curb, he pays one of the kids on the bikes for his shirt. Here, two negotiations take place. Most obviously is the tangible exchange of money for a shirt. The kid accepts the money and sells his shirt to be used as a sling. The second is an unspoken negotiation on their lives. Had the boy refused, his fate may have turned out much differently. Despite being seen by both boys, Chigurh spares their lives and walks away. This is the first instance in which Chigurh chooses not to kill where the viewer expects he would have. His moral code allowed the boys to be spared. I've heard many people refer to Chigurh as death incarnate or death itself. How I see it, he more closely resembles the mediator between death and its victims. An unbridled rampage of death would look much different from the actions of Chigurh. There would be no negotiation, no option of chance, and no ability to blend in with society. Death must be restrained to remain effective in secrecy. In no way am I advocating for a merciful side of Chigurh. He's anything but merciful. But the twisted whispers in his mind are far more complex than unbridled murder. How can a villain be interesting if their motives are completely understood? Chigurh would cease to be terrifying if we knew that in every circumstance he would just kill. The possibility of his sparing certain people, conjoined with his repertoire of merciless brutality, makes Anton Chigurh one of the most terrifying antagonists in cinema. He is no Terminator. A piece of humanity remains inside him.
You recognize him at some level as being human.
And human.
Yeah, and that was, again, an interesting line I think that Javier had to walk.
Josh Brolin aptly pinpointed the biggest contributor to No Country for Old Men's success.
They don't expect their movies to be, fully accessible. There's no pandering going on. There's no pandering going on with Cormac. There's no pandering going on with the Coens, and they'd never say that. I mean, they don't talk about themselves at all.
Cinema at its best is not weighed down by having to pander to audiences. Thanos is a villain who draws many similarities to Anton Chigurh. He's ironically also played by Josh Brolin. Yet, Marvel Studios was limited in their ability to deliver the character to his fullest potential because they had to pander to such a large audience. Thanos is an extremely minute and inoffensive example of this broader issue in modern cinema. The Coen brothers masterfully adapted McCarthy's book into a story that doesn't seek validation from the audience. Films that are crafted purely for the sake of telling good stories will stand the test of time as the greatest movies ever made. Javier Bardem's portrayal of Anton Chigurh, acting as the mediator of death, paired with the unparalleled screenplay and direction of the Coen brothers, resulted in the creation of the most terrifying villain of all time.
Academy Award winner, Best Picture of the Year. You could win your very own Sharp Aqua's 52-inch 1080p HD LCD TV and Blu-ray disc player. Enter at dose.ca. No Country for Old Men, now on DVD.